Good morning, everyone. For those who are here, thank you for coming so early this morning. So welcome to this session on greening local financial institutions. This is a topic that I'm personally very attached to because when I started my career as an SME relationship manager in corporate banking, I witnessed firsthand how local banks are deeply rooted in the local economy, cultivating long-lasting relationships with their clients and developing a profound understanding of their unique needs and challenges. And this goes well beyond a credit scoring model and financial ratios. So this makes local financial institutions a critical enabler of the Green Climate Fund's mission of financing the transition towards low carbon and climate resilient economies in developing countries. Today, we are fortunate to learn from a diverse group of distinguished and accomplished professionals on the challenges and opportunities that they face on the ground. We will follow the same format as yesterday's sessions. First, a case study, followed by a panel discussion, each with a dedicated Q&A session. As a first speaker, I would like to now invite Mr. Harold Mogali on stage. Harold is a climate finance specialist at the Development Bank of Southern Africa, with over 15 years' experience within the financial sector, spanning investment management, financial and corporate advisory, as well as development finance. Harold manages the DBSA's climate finance facility, which aims to de-risk and increase the bankability of climate projects in order to crowd in private sector investment. Co-funded by GCF, the facility will hopefully serve as a template for future replication beyond the Common Monetary Authority area of Lesotho, Namibia, Eswatini, and Southern Africa. Harold, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Georges. Is the presentation online? So, as we wait for the presentation, I'd like to introduce the DBSA. We are a development finance institution owned by the South African government. We were founded in 1983. There it is. So, as I said, we're fully owned by the South African government. We're an infrastructure development finance institution. We are a well-governed institution, have no unqualified audits from 1983 onwards. We have a total asset base of $6 billion with equity around $2.9 billion. From a stakeholder perspective, we are globally accredited with the likes of the Global Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund, which is a key stakeholder of ours, and also we're aligned to the EU 9 pillars. From a sector perspective, as an infrastructure fund, we focus on 4 key sectors, that being transport and logistics, energy, and environment. That's where a lot of our renewable energy portfolio is. Digital infrastructure, as well as water and sanitation. We also have social infrastructure aspects, being education, more social, student housing or student accommodation within South Africa and the region, social and affordable housing, as well as healthcare facilities. DBSA takes an integrated approach to infrastructure development across the African continent. We focus on planning for municipalities, how they can prepare their CapEx plans. We also have a dedicated project preparation facility, whereby we provide funding for bankable feasibility studies in South Africa, in SADC, and across the African continent. But as well, our core tenet is actually debt financing of infrastructure projects across the African continent. We also support in building, from a project management perspective, infrastructure projects within South Africa, and also maintain. You'll see there the map of our core territories that we support. We have 2 main clusters of clients, being public sector, municipality, SOEs, and sovereigns, as well as private sector, which is triple Ps and private sector. From an Africa perspective, as I said, we are Development Bank of Southern Africa, but we operate across the African region. We have presence in SADC, the ECA, ECOWAS, and a few other African countries that we provide infrastructure debt financing to. So now to the core of this presentation. Our presentation of the 50-50 funded between the DBSA and the GCF Climate Finance Facility, which we call it CFF for short. So in essence, the CFF is a dedicated lending facility that's aimed to catalyze private sector investment into green projects. And it focuses that by focusing on projects that support mitigation and adaptation projects. So it's what the GCF call a cross-cutting program, where it focuses both on on climate adaptation and on mitigation. The facility is more premised on 4 jurisdictions, being Eswatini, Lesotho, Namibia, and South Africa. And I said it's more geared towards promoting private sector investment into green projects across the African continent. And we're looking at a leverage ratio of around 1 to 5. That is for $1 that CFF invests to. We're looking at $5 of private sector investment that is catalyzed into private sector led projects. The CFF also looks at the additionality principle, i.e., we want to crowd in versus crowding out private sector investments into these projects. The way we do it is we offer subordinated and first loss capital to crowd in this private sector capital. As you recall from yesterday's proceeding, there was a lot of discussion about the requirements for facilities and mechanisms such as the CFF that can take that subordinated or first loss position to crowd in private sector investment. And also the blended finance approach as well. So DBSA as a state-owned institution, we are fully owned by Cyprus government, but we finance all our funding from the market. So we issue bonds, we have bilateral credit lines with MDBs. So we don't have any state support from the market. So our pricing is market related. So we blend that money, the fund that we raise from the market with GCF concessional funding to offer a very attractive concessional funding package to attract private sector investments into the green projects across the 4 jurisdictions. So what does the CFF try to achieve? The main aspect of CFF, catalyze private sector investment, especially in the SME sector, as George has alluded to. We've noted that the local financial institutions within the region are quite risk averse when it comes to these small, innovative projects that they're not really comfortable with. So the CFF provides that platform to say, okay, you can provide 50% of the project debt. The CFO will come in and provide the 30% to provide some comfort to you and to further enhance and credit enhance their participation by taking the subordinated debt position. It's also primarily focused on commercial industrial sectors and where there is private offtake between the private sector developer or private sector project and the private sector to offtake. So it looks at being a mechanism to address significant barriers that private sector proponents are facing in actually getting their projects financed and implemented as well. From a sector perspective, as I alluded to earlier, the CFF is climate mitigation and climate adaptation focus. From a climate mitigation perspective, we look at renewable energy projects, solar, biogas, wind. We've been sort of getting a lot of solar projects across the 4 jurisdictions, and we haven't been getting a lot of biogas or hydro projects, but there are opportunities as well. But from a solar perspective, it's more distributed solar from a portfolio perspective, where traditionally local banks would want to stand and load IPP offtake, but we support project proponents that take a more portfolio risk, where there's rooftop solar on CNI commercial buildings and industrial. We also look at energy efficiency in industry and existing facilities, i.e. Energy efficiency in buildings, and also in retrofits as well. And we can also lend to low emission transport. This has been quite a challenging sector to invest in. The sector for low emission transport is quite nascent. There's a lot of development and support needed from a government perspective. So we haven't seen many opportunities there, but we are driving our origination and marketing efforts in actually increasing low emission transport. We also do waste to energy. From adaptation to climate change, adaptation projects, we look at water preservation, water supply management, water efficiency, and water treatment. The opportunities we've been seeing here is more in the agricultural sector, where DBSA is not really an expert in, but we do find opportunities that how we can support this core sector of the facility to unlock green investment as well. So from a portfolio basis, the CFF, we're looking at a portfolio of 70% projects that are climate mitigation and 30% adaptation to climate change. So why the CFF and how does the CFF benefit? How can local financial institutions benefit from greening their financial institutions? So CFF provides a proof of concept model for emerging economies and local financial institutions or what can be done within their markets. By having the CFF inside the DBSA versus a standalone green bank model where it's a standalone model, you learn, you can leverage from a lot of efficiencies within your local institution, i.e. systems, procedures, processes, institutional investment process. So it's a way to start that transitioning from traditional financing to greening a local financial institution. It's also centered on creating an enable environment via demonstration. This is a live case study of what can be done from a South African or Southern African perspective in an emerging market to green a local financial institution. It also looks at addressing key barriers. How can we catalyze private sector investment into these green projects? And co-current is, as we at the GPIC here, is how do we align with the Green Climate Fund's objectives of promoting private sector participation in low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure across the globe, especially within an African context. So, key aspect, as I said, crowd in private sector, leverage public sector capital, i.e., how can DBSA as a public institution leverage that public sector investment to catalyze private sector uh, in investment into green projects. So, as I said, the CFF is really is aligned to the green bank model, but it's within the DBSA as a dedicated finance facility. So, the key models of the CFF is premised on the green bank model. As a dedicated climate facility, it's looking at a blended finance approach that catalyzes private sector investment, uses of debt and credit enhancement instruments to attract that private sector senior debt and at times equity capital to make projects happen to be additional. And also it's complementary to existing funders and supporters. The senior lenders within our markets, they're very excited when we approach and present the CFF with regards to projects and how they can actually make them and convince their specific credit committee to get it over the line that you have this first loss subordinated credit enhancement instrument as well. And also, it focuses on market orientation. How are you responding to your market needs, your client needs, your project needs? Make them such that this have to be very flexible. Each transaction, as you know, each project is different. One could need 15 years of tenor, the other could need 10 years of tenor. Other could need a capital holiday of 2 years, one year. The other could need a three year capital grace tenor. So it's very flexible in how you respond to market needs. But also, it's about leveraging private sector investment into green investments. From a key learnings and capacity learnings perspective, I think there's a key role that national development banks within jurisdictions across Africa can learn from a facility such as CFF. For us specifically, we've seen a keen interest in national development banks within the other three jurisdictions, being Eswatini, Lesotho, and Namibia. They're very keen to learn from the CFF model and replicate and scale, and that's one of the objectives of the CFF. How do we replicate and scale this, just not within the common monetary area, but also within SADC, also ECA, ECOWAS, across Africa, across the globe. So just replicability and scale as well, how we can have these similar funding mechanisms across the globe. CFF also takes a partnership approach towards supporting projects, regular communication between senior lenders, other local finance institutions, private equity players, project proponents, national designated authorities, i.e. your government relations. So it's constantly a partnership approach of how we can design such such an instrument and support. And also targeted origination. As I alluded to, adaptation projects have been quite difficult. Adaptation finance is quite difficult for people to get around, but you have to target that origination, i.e. specialized RFPs, discussing with project proponents how to structure transactions to make them happen. And a key aspect, I think, is also technical assistance. At times, senior lenders don't have the expertise in certain products or technologies. So you need to get what they call a lender's technical advisor that will support the senior lenders and other debt providers in just understanding the project and also the market orientation. So I think a key aspect is when you design such a facility, you need to have that component that you have a technical assistance package that doesn't overburden the SME, because normally those funds, that requirement is funded by the SME. And also, key aspect for the CFF is having a robust institutional framework. But other than the subordination of the debt, the concessional finance, the blended finance, there's other key attributes that make the CFF quite an attractive facility, and what learnings can be learned in implementing similar facilities. One is quite key, having a dedicated team that executes from cradle to grave. I'm a part of a team of two that manages the CFF on a day-to-day basis, but we have an immense support staff behind us that implement, that originate, report, monitor, execute CFF. Two, we have what they call a CFF operations manual. So there's an operation manual how the CFF is governed. This talks to ESG, reporting and monitoring, environmental perspective, gender, your appraisal process, how the appraisal process is followed. And in that, we have what we call a CFS steering committee, that before a project goes into the DBSA's full appraisal cycle, we have a team of individuals composed of DBSA specialists and also independent managers that assess from a CFF and GCF investment criteria perspective that it meets the climate impacts, that it meets the paradigm shift objectives, that it's efficient and effectiveness, that the needs of the private sector are there, that you are catalyzing private sector investment and you're not crowding out any private sector investment in, and also sustainable development as well. We as a DFI, we're actually focused on development impact as well. Sustainable development is actually quite important as well. Continuous development of the project pipeline and discussing with colleagues and other stakeholders of how to bring pipeline, how to not skew the portfolio to a developed sort of market such as Africa, how to support other markets such as Eswatini, Lesotho, and Namibia as well. So I think that's very, very quite key. And the last one is the investment approval process. As I said, we have a dedicated staff in CFF, but we have a steering committee meeting that assesses that climate impact, sustainable development. So following that approval by the steering committee and constantly appraise the development of the project through the steering committee, it will go through DBSA's investment committee structures, which is multifaceted, and every project within for the CFF is considered by our board. And for the size of projects, normally that would just sit with our management board, but for the size of projects, the CFF is actually provides an accolade that it's quite important facility for the DBSA to support projects across Southern Africa and how we can catalyze private sector investment and enhance green projects within the common monetary area. And thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harold, for this very interesting and comprehensive expose. We started a bit late, so maybe we have only time for one question. So in parallel, while we are screening the room for anybody who may have questions, I would like to invite our distinguished panelists on stage. Thank you. The microphone is coming behind you.
Thank you, sir, for the presentation. I'm working at IFAD, and at IFAD also we are exploring a similar structure. So I'm really interested to know first if you have an independent structure for the facility, or you are ultimately your financial institution is bearing the risk. Now, that's the question number one. The question number two is I'm interested in how much capacity you needed to have to develop such a structure. Because I think, thinking about our own experience, it's extremely intense, and there is a high transaction cost. So I see the benefit of this structure, but I think also I would like to know how did you absorb all the transaction costs? Did you receive, for example, some technical or grant assistance or grant from the GCF, or did you cover the cost?
Okay, I will start with the second one. First, so yes, we did receive immense support from the TCF on establishing this facility. We got a grant that was supported the staff costs, marketing, travel, etc. But we relied a lot on DBSA's internal capabilities as well, from an environmental perspective, gender perspective, financial modeling perspective, and credit aspects. What we have seen challenging is, yes, there's a component of technical capabilities, i.e., when you're getting into these debt transactions, you are dealing with a senior lender who would at times need a lender's technical advisor, and that has to be paid for by the by the project proponent as well. But also, the more expensive one is actually the lawyers drafting all those intercreditor arrangements as well. So we as DBSA, just from the learnings of implementing this facility, we're looking at mechanisms of how we can support that component of implementing the facility, because it is a burden to the project proponents as well. So we're looking at raising additional technical assistance capital as well. On the first question, currently, yes, it's yes and no. So yes, currently we are bearing the risk fully as DBSA implementing this, but that wasn't the initial design of the program. The initial design was the CFF co-funded by GCF and DBSA. They were each burden the risk itself, but from a FX perspective, currently GCF is working on a mechanism of how they can absorb foreign currency risk. So we found a bridging sort of facility to see how we can support GCF and support their concessional funding through us to support the underlying risk to the transaction. So it's a fully from a foreign exchange perspective, the borrowers don't bear any FX risk. But in other markets where the euro, US dollar, I think you'll get GCF to be able to bear that foreign currency exposure as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Harold, for these detailed answers, and thank you to the gentleman for this very interesting question. Now, without further ado, we'll move to the panel discussion. I will also sit down, and maybe I'll start off with the introductions, and we would say ladies first. We start all the way on the left with Mrs. Mary Juguna. She is Principal Specialist Capital Markets at Financial Sector Development Africa, in short FSDA, a development agency working to build and strengthen financial markets across Africa. She focuses on policy and regulatory reform, capital market transaction support, and product development covering several African countries. Her previous experience is in capital markets regulation and commercial legal practice. She is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a member of the Institute of Certified Secretaries. Next, we have Mrs. Cynthia Mbaru. She's a director in the corporate finance division of Dyer and Blair Investment Bank Limited, a leading investment bank here in East Africa and headquartered in Nairobi. She has significant experience raising equity and debt for corporates and financial institutions as the transaction advisor, arranger, sponsoring broker, and placing agent. She also sits on the board of Sanlam Investments East Africa Limited and the Kenya Association of Stockbrokers and Investment Banks. Next, we are fortunate to welcome Ms. Merceline Joroge, Senior Investment Officer at Propaco Regional Office here in East Africa. She currently originates and coordinates transactions in the financial sector, including banks, microfinance, and non-bank financial institutions. She is very passionate about developing these partnerships with financial institutions towards key developmental themes, such as promoting finance for climate-oriented projects in the private sector, access for finance for SMEs, and women entrepreneurs. She has led several transactions with leading institutions across the East Africa region. Next, we welcome Mr. Leonard Kange, Divisional Head, Corporate Finance and Advisory Services at the Bank of Industry, Nigeria's oldest and largest development finance institution. With over 29 years in the financial services industry, his expertise covers investment banking, treasury, corporate banking, and commercial banking. Leonard is currently supporting the bank's capital raising efforts, including bonds and syndications. And right next to me, allow me to welcome Mr. Syed Jafar Raza. He's Group Head Investment, International and Transaction Banking at JS Bank Limited, a commercial bank headquartered and listed in Pakistan. Jafar has over 2 decades of experience in the area of trade finance, corporate relationship management, investment, and transaction banking. He's also a member of the board of JS Global Investment, a publicly listed equity brokerage and investment banking arm of JS Bank, and he sits on the board of several investee startups of JS Bank. And with that, I believe we are complete with the introductions, and we are very fortunate to have this diverse set of financial professionals on these panels. And to kick off, I would simply like to start then with going left to right. How do you live in your organizations greening local finance institutions? What does it mean in your organizational context? And maybe I'll give the floor first to Mary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the warm welcome. Congratulations for hosting this conference. Allow me to start by just saying that Financial Sector Deepening Africa is a specialist development agency, as has been highlighted. And our role is to support the strengthening of financial markets in Africa so that they can be able to perform their role in supporting sustainability within the continent. And we do that in various ways, and that will answer the question that has been asked about how we green local institutions. And what we do, we work across the entire ecosystem, the financial sector ecosystem. So on the one hand, we work together with policymakers and regulators on the enabling environment. And when we talk about greening institutions, what that means on the regulatory and policy side is that we work with policymakers, regulators in terms of bringing to bear frameworks that actually support mobilization of green finance in different markets. That may be supporting development of regulatory frameworks for green bonds, also supporting ministries of finance in terms of technical assistance on their their climate finance units, together with even working with entities in the insurance space to help build their capacity in terms of, whether it is reporting and being able to assess investments based on, climate resilience criteria. Together with that, we do support potential issuers that intend to come to market. So we don't just look at the enabling environment, we also work with the private sector to help bring to market demonstration transactions that are seeking to catalyze or mobilize green finance. And how we do that is we provide technical assistance to issuers who want to issue, for example, thematic bonds and other thematic instruments. And we do that in various ways. So we find that financial institutions, especially those who are coming to the market for the first time, have limited capacity sometimes, even limited understanding on what are some of these scientific-based targets that they're meant to be tracking to be able to communicate impact, even how to structure some of these thematic bonds. We provide technical assistance for that. So we've done that over a period of about 3-4 years, and so far we've been able to mobilize in excess of 400 million US dollars and counting. Beyond that, we also consider capacity building a very important role. And so in various ways, one of which I will mention, for example, we have a program that we partner with the Cambridge University and the IIED to provide a training program on climate finance for the Africa region. So that is something that, it's a regional program, and so it's very targeted at the specific focus cohort that we seek to train for that particular capacity building initiative. So I think I'll stop there. Those are the main, I think I'm trying to build on main buckets across the ecosystem, but just to say that we do have a investment arm that is financial sector deepening Africa investments. That's an investment arm, and it actually deploys capital towards early stage businesses that are seeking to green economies in different ways through climate resilient projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Cynthia.
Good morning, everyone. For us, I work in the capital markets, and I would say that we're in the early stages of greening that sector. We have actively added green bonds to our advisory offering, and we work within the Kenya Green Bond Framework, which is a collaboration between the Nairobi Securities Exchange, Climate Bonds Initiative, Kenya Bankers Association, and FSD. So we do overlap with a lot of what Mary does. And within that framework, it just teaches, it just allows issuers to have a pathway to issuing green bonds. It takes them through the certification and verification process, and advisors were able to walk them through that. And in addition to that, the Capital Markets Authority of Kenya issued a policy guidance note on green bonds. So as part of our work, we do help advisors, issuers go through that process. And when we look at listed entities on the Nairobi Securities Exchange, there's also a comprehensive EGS framework. So we do work with issuers in terms of how to navigate those frameworks, demystify them, such that when they come to the capital markets, they do have some green elements to them. I think one of the things we've noticed is that a lot of issuers do have a lot of green aspects already within their business. So sometimes a lot of the work is just putting that in a framework that is easily to digest and understanding for them. But I would say that in terms of the capital markets, we're just in the early stages, and we do have a few building blocks, but we do have a way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Marceline, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Marceline Jaroke with Propaco. Propaco is part of the AFD group. We are the bilateral development finance institution by the French government. At AFD Propaco, we've been in climate financing for quite some time, but for this particular forum, I will highlight our largest program to date. It's called the Transforming Financial Systems for Climate, and it's a partnership between the AFD group and GCF, basically to support financial institutions, both public banks through AFD and private banks through Propaco, and to provide financing, concessional funding, and technical assistance. So the total program was for 650 million euro, and so far we have committed 540 million euro with various financial institutions. And the underlying projects that it's quite far-ranging, the kind of climate projects we can finance, from renewable energy, energy efficiency, climate smart agriculture, climate adaptation. So we find there are various opportunities in the different markets. This program is eligible, the 17 countries that are eligible, majority of them in Africa. So it's quite built for African countries and the local financial systems. Maybe I'll just highlight a few of the partnerships we have. So in South Africa, we have signed 100 million euro with First Rand Bank and 80 million euro with Investec, both climate dedicated facilities and accompanied by technical assistance that is co-funded between AFD and GCF. We have also a $100 million facility with Bank of Industry in Nigeria, again accompanied by technical assistance. And in Egypt, with the National Bank of Egypt, AFD has committed 100 million euro, again for climate agriculture, and also includes technical assistance of 2 million euro for Egypt's Ministry of Environment to develop the national climate policy and to carry out the technical and feasibility studies for projects and in various sectors. So that's the largest program AFD has. But before that, we also had a SunRev facility, again targeting renewable energy and energy efficiency projects, quite limited in scope compared to TFSC, but has been deployed in Kenya with 3 banks. So again, we've been very active in supporting the local financial institutions towards climate financing.
Thank you very much. Annette?
Thank you, George, and good morning, everybody. First, I think I would like to begin by telling you a little bit about Bank of Industry. Bank of Industry is Nigeria's oldest and most successful DFI. We are 100% owned by the public sector, but our focus is purely the private sector. We don't lend to government, we lend only to the private sector. And within the private sector, we cover both the micro enterprises, the SMEs, as well as the large enterprises. In terms of asset size, the bank is about 5.3 billion in terms of assets, dollars, and equity about approaching $1 billion, about $935 million. NPLs about 1.8%. Yeah, those are the main numbers. Now, in terms of impact numbers, over the last 5 years, the bank has disbursed over $4.3 billion to both large enterprises, SMEs, and micro enterprises. Total number of institutions impacted about 4.3 million. 95% of that are MSMEs. 50% of that, or 56, I think 52% of that is women-owned MSMEs, etc. Job creation, about 10 million jobs over the last 5 years. Now, with respect to greening financial institutions, I believe that for Bank of Industry, our first commitment is to be very intentional about greening our operations as well as helping our customers. As I mentioned, we deal with the private sector. That's our main area of focus. And so to do that, from a policy perspective, strategy, etc., we've had all the necessary approvals from our board of directors, and implementation has commenced aggressively. Now, one of the key projects that has come out of our implementation is a partnership that we had with the UNDP called Access to Renewable Energy Program. Now, this is a program that tries to deploy solar-powered electricity to rural communities. We selected for a pilot, for the pilot phase of the program, we selected 10 communities across the country and deployed solar electricity to these communities. They found it very beneficial. Repayments and for the facilities is usually based on prepaid cards, which are rechargeable. And the beauty of it is that you can recharge for as small as $1, $2, etc., and all of that. And as you use, pay as you go, essentially. This has impacted over 3,420 communities and households, businesses and households within these 10 communities. The bank, in terms of another area of focus, is on renewable energy. We've set up a renewable energy group that is dedicated to providing financing to our customers to help them green their operations. And this is done directly to the customers as well as indirectly. Indirectly, because the bank is limited in terms of the number of branches we have, so we partner with the commercial banks to provide on-lending facilities for them to lend to customers in eligible industries. We also have an ESG division. The framework has been developed, it's been integrated into our operations, and our risk assets have been classified into various categories, and we're now at the implementation, monitoring, and reporting stage. I see I'm out of time, so I will stop here and share some more as we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonard. And we're moving to Jafar.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So my name is Jafar Raza. I am representing a bank called GS Bank, which is headquartered in Karachi, Pakistan. It's part of a larger financial group called GS Group, within which we have an asset management company, a brokerage, listed brokerage entity. We have investment in one of the largest insurance companies, and we have investments in a few fintechs as well. JS Bank is one of the younger banks in the country. Being young has its advantage. When we started off, we did not go down the same path as some of the other larger and older institutions went into. As an institution, we took we took sustainability and climate finance very seriously, and as we were accredited with GCF about 3 years back, and our first project was approved last year, and it's about to go into execution stage, hopefully this month only. The project is called Pakistan Distributed Solar Project, which is co-financing from the GS Bank and support from GCF in form of a funded guarantee structure. Now, to your question about what does greening the financial institution mean for GS Bank as an institution, first and the foremost, there is an academic explanation of it, and that is to is the process whereby you actually put in all the policies regarding environment and social related issues into your everyday operations and your decision making. So this is in all honesty the least that we do. JS as an institution, GS Bank as an institution wants to go ahead of it, and as they say, the way you think, the way you do something is you do everything. So it's not one particular transaction, it's not one particular office or a branch that we declared as a model for green operations. Is we try to incorporate all our philosophies and commitments about environment and climate change into our everyday actions. That not only means that we change how we operate. It's not an easy job, because we draw the same resources from the larger industry, which follows a path which is perhaps not so green, so to speak. And in a developing country, when you make choices based on your climate commitments, you have to forego a lot of profitable transactions. So GS as an institution has actually walked the talk, and has not financed any of the coal projects that went into operations a couple of years back. Uh, it was part of our commitment. We are also working very closely with UNDP. We are WWF certified green office, and we are uh, perhaps the only institution which has the ESG policy, the sustainable policy, sustainable report, and also its green banking policy up and being followed at all levels, at the risk management, at the operations level, at the ELCO and the credit committees level as well. So for us, is greening the entire operations of the institution, and as a bank, all our credit decisions are now, they follow a certain commitment that we have made towards the climate.
Thank you very much. And going over my notes here, I think we unpacked a lot here with this diverse panel. And a key theme that came back was, of course, capacity building, because green finance is not straightforward. There's a lot of taxonomies. There's what is the appropriate use of funds? What is the reporting that is appropriate after the funds have been dispersed? And those capacities cannot be acquired overnight, and it takes time to build those up, also with the more local partner institutions. We have then on the lending side, very interesting, Leonard said, well, it starts within the bank first, so your own operations, you look what you can improve. But of course, as a lender, your key business is also your scope 3 emissions, so who are you lending to? And then proactively financing renewable energy projects. But we mentioned now a lot renewable energy projects, but it goes even beyond that. There's a lot of potential for mitigation and also for adaptation out there that can fall under the greening, the green finance aspect. And then lastly, Jafar also mentioned the negative screening. So for example, forgoing or making the difficult decision, especially in countries that are still heavily reliant on certain energy sources, and that are less climate friendly, and making that conscious decision of foregoing profit and moving away from that. So thank you again for this first overview. And probably the question that the audience is asking itself is, so what are then actually the challenges and the opportunities that you see on the ground in your specific context? Maybe we start again with Mary.
Thanks for that question. And I think just to say, from where we sit, we see challenges and opportunities as two different sides of the same coin. And that really informs what we see as areas of focus for our work. And what I mean, for example, is when you look at, if I can go back to the point about capacity, that of course is a challenge. We see that both on the policy and regulatory side, but also with private sector players, with financial institutions themselves. And what I mean is, on the one hand, of course, policymakers and regulators at times have very many competing priorities. And we find that, this topic of climate change, climate finance, natural capital as well, it is, I don't want to say new, but not fully appreciated in some aspects by some of these policymakers and regulators. So when you talk about introducing new, whether it's tax incentives or policy frameworks, there's a whole lot of capacity building that is required to make that happen. But beyond that, I think let me talk about capacity more broadly in terms of, for example, when you look at the fiscal space that many of the African governments have right now, it's really constrained. When you look at, the effects of COVID, the war, Russia-Ukraine war, and the supply chain disruptions that has resulted in, which has, of course, resulted in many economic headwinds, inflationary pressures. For them, the priority has been then, issues to do with debt sustainability. So when it comes to capacity around just fiscal capacity to even consider moving beyond whatever they are giving to climate finance and moving beyond that to give more, I think then it behoves us as as their partners to even look to other areas like the private sector and what can be done in the private sector to help catalyze the capital that is needed for climate resilient projects on the continent. But when I say that these challenges present opportunities for us, what I mean is we exist as FSD Africa to address some of those challenges and to work with partners on the ground to address those challenges. And so what that looks like for us is it presents an opportunity for us to work, for example, with the private sector. And let me give specific examples. For example, when we work with financial institutions, trying to help them understand, for example, how to, let me give an example of some of the bond transactions that we support. We have worked with several banks in the region. Several banks were coming to the market for the first time to issue green bonds, for example. There is thin understanding, and there has been thin understanding about, for example, the kind of taxonomies that they're supposed to, adhere to when it comes to their bond frameworks, the kind of scientific-based targets that they should be tracking for purposes of reporting, and just being able to have a very targeted approach in terms of the technical assistance that we provide to make sure that we're meeting some of those needs very specifically, and not just when they are about to issue in terms of the structuring support before issuance, but even after issuance, because after the issuance, they need to track certain metrics to be able to report impact. And beyond that, let me just say maybe one of the last challenges that I can highlight, an opportunity, is that we find that there are large pools of institutional capital in Africa. It continues to grow. I think we are in excess of 1 trillion USD at the moment and counting. But that capital is held largely in government securities. It's not flowing necessarily as maybe as efficiently as it should towards infrastructure and other green projects. So that challenge, we see an opportunity there to work with others, for example, Infraco Africa and Cardano Development, in helping to come up with or to develop a credit enhancement facility, particularly for Kenya. We've also worked closely with InfraCredit Nigeria, where we have provided technical funding for a technical assistance facility to be able to provide technical assistance for some of these projects, not just technical assistance, but to be able to support the credit enhancement facilities that these entities will be offering in Kenya and that they do offer in Nigeria in terms of guarantees, because we believe that those guarantees will lend confidence to institutional investors to be able to pool their capital towards some of these considered more risky projects, is what I can say. I mean, I can go on and on. There are many challenges and opportunities that we see, but I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Cynthia, over to you.
Thank you. I think for us, in terms of challenges, it's more practical because when we engage with issuers who are looking to issue green bonds, for example, I think one of the things that come up immediately is that there's a very high upfront costs going down the green route when you look at the verification and the certification process. So sometimes that becomes a barrier. And then secondly, in terms of the timeline now, adding the green certification process, it adds a few weeks to the process. So if you have an issuer who really wants to come to market quickly or needs the money quite fast, once you add costs and then you add more to the timeline, that becomes sort of like a real practical challenge to them. And sometimes for them, they're like, it might not necessarily be worth it. When you look at the education of the local institutional investors, it's taking time, but they also don't necessarily offer a lower risk premium if you have a green bond. So you have a situation for an issuer where you have higher upfront costs, the timeline is longer, and then there's no benefit potentially in terms of pricing. So I think that's one of the challenges that we're working on locally in the market. I think in terms of opportunities, what we're starting to see is investors now asking for what are the ESG elements in terms of the issuer? Is this a green bond? Because for Kenya, in Kenya, for example, green bonds now have infrastructure bond status. So it means that your interest income is exempt from withholding tax. Now, with the high interest rate environment, we're starting to see green bonds now become attractive to issuers. So they start seeing like maybe there's upfront cost, but we're able to balance that out with the lower risk premium. I think now, as Mary mentioned, FSD has also stepped in and said, look, we'll help capitalize the sector. So they're also able to take up some of the upfront costs, particularly on the certification side. So I think we are seeing opportunities slowly coming to market. For us, I think ideally what we want is to have a situation where issuers are like, I really want to issue the green bond. And then you've got investors who like, we actually really want green bonds, and we're allocating maybe 10, 15% to those type of assets. I think once we get to that type of stage, we'll start seeing growing issuance of green bonds in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very hands-on explanation on realities on the ground. So Marceline, over to you.
All right. So maybe to mention one of the challenges we see regarding the program I mentioned earlier, the transforming financial systems for climate TFSC. This facility is mainly given to the banks in hard currency, and we see that sometimes the demand in the local financial institutions is for local currency, and therefore there's a lack of this local currency funding. Of course, now our facility being in hard currency means some of the institutions, like microfinance institutions, would be excluded or not able to access the TFSC funding as they don't have the hard currency assets to fund. And so we would like to see that, and we believe there's a place for domestic capital and domestic savings, as Mary mentioned. The banks place these deposits in government securities. We'd like to see that the domestic capital and savings are also partly channeled towards climate financing, and that's the opportunity we see as well, and not necessarily from external funding like the TFSC facility. One other challenge I think we see is identifying a pipeline of projects that are eligible for funding under these programs. And I think it's mainly because the market here in Kenya and in Africa is nascent for climate financing. So we really do work with the local commercial banks to identify eligible projects, and especially in climate adaptation, I think is where it's largely misunderstood. And so we deploy technical assistance, and we do have large pockets with this together with GCF to help the commercial banks to identify and develop an eligible pipeline.
Thank you. Leonard?
Thank you very much. Yes, we do see quite a number of challenges as well as opportunities. And I think the biggest challenge that we've seen so far is financing, raising the funding, because we're all aware in the developing countries like Nigeria, there's a huge gap in terms of funding that is available for renewable energy, sustainability, generally ESG transactions, infrastructure, and all of that. It's a huge gap. How do you raise that funding? Most of the countries are not well rated. Some of them have been downgraded, etc. So you want to raise money, the price is very high, and all of that. For local DFIs like us, the state also has its own fiscal challenges, and so they're not able to provide the funding that we need. So what we have had to do is to actually go out and purchase our own funding in the international market. And so over the last 5 years, the bank has been able to raise over $5 billion from the international market through syndications and also bilateral relationships like the AFDB $100 million that we have, which is almost finished, by the way. We need more. And also, we had our very first Eurobond last year for 750 million euro. I think the one that is most exciting for us is the transforming financial systems for climate financing that we have from AFD, the French Development agency. That is 100 million euro, and it's aimed at financing sustainability in terms of mitigation as well as adaptation. The funding comes with a 2.5 million euro technical assistance to help the bank to mainstream sustainability financing, not just in its own operations, but also for our customers as well. That we've received the first tranche of 50 million euro. That has been 100% been disbursed. We are now waiting for the recruitment of the technical assistant consultant so that we can have the balance to come in. The other thing that we have also, the other challenge that we've also found is that for the MSMEs particularly, which is a key sector that we support, Nigeria has about 41 million MSMEs. They represent about 50% of contribution to the budget. They're about 90% of employment. So for a DFI, we have to be very active in that sector. One of the key challenges is risk. Most commercial banks will not touch them because of risk. So we have had to find innovative ways of de-risking. One is to go back to our principals, the shareholders, the government, and say, listen, we are not asking for additional funding, but all we need is that we need you to set aside a certain amount of money, 10 billion naira, which is to de-risk our lending to this sector. And that has been working very well. The second part is we have partnered with UNIDO to in their energy efficiency program as well as cleaner production program to provide financing to our industry, our customers within the industry to produce, to reduce waste and to improve efficiency, water storage and all of those things. And what we have done, what they've been able to do is to put together a $600,000 first loss guarantee facility, which has helped us to deploy funding to the industrial customers and to help them to green their activities. I think I'll stop here for now. Thanks.
So, opportunities. So, for Pakistan, I think one of the best opportunity is the role of central bank. The State Bank has, which is the central bank of Pakistan, is very supportive of and these initiatives, and they have provided support in terms of policy guidelines and support of working with the banks very closely to remove hurdles which as with any other project come during the implementation and everything. So that's the opportunity. The other one is the fact that as a nation, it's a young nation, and majority of the young business, the new businesses are coming up in the shape of startups and very conscious minded individuals setting up their own businesses. And if those set up with the climate considerations on day first, I think going forward, all their actions actually lead towards a more sustainable structure, financial structure, and their operational structure. And so, if we see such kind of possible uptake, but this uptake is mostly in the SME and middle market, where the credit risk is very high. I'll come to the challenges later on, but these are the two opportunities I think are the biggest opportunity for financial institutions operating in Pakistan or interested in Pakistan to fully exploit. In terms of challenges, there are many challenges at operational level, at risk level and at business development level. But all of these are piece and parcel of any initiative that is undertaken by any financial institution. However, at this point in time, as perhaps with most of other developing countries, the biggest challenge is the country risk. So if any financing or any structure is dependent on the country risk, or is the pricing is benchmarked with the sovereign ratings, that would make it actually quite impossible for the eventual borrowers to take benefit of those avenues which are available. Closely linked with this issue is the currency risk and where it is to be parked. So they are working. If whatever way you slice it or dice it, the cost of borrowing, if it comes to around 30% per annum, that would make any business unviable. Right. So for me, there could be many challenges, and those challenges can be resolved if the commitment is there. The capacity issue in the industry, especially in the financial sector, is an issue, but I think that can be always improved. But at this point in time, the largest or the biggest challenge that I think is there for a country like Pakistan and a lot of other developing countries is the cost of borrowing, and that's the elephant in the room. For at least next 2 to 3 years, any structure or anything that is to be worked out has to first address this issue, and then perhaps the other issues would can be taken care of.
Thank you very much. And if I go over my note, I think again there's a lot to unpack here, and a lot of challenges have been named, but equally a lot of opportunities. And I like how Mary actually opened now this part of the session, that the opportunities and the challenges are closely linked, and are two sides of the same coin. We heard now that on the capital market side, both on the buy side and the sell side, there's questions arising around, well, what taxonomy do we use and how do we go about it? How do we implement it? Then very concretely for issuers, is what is in it for me if I go green? Do I get a risk premium about it, or do I not? And why should I accept those longer timelines to go to the market and additional costs? But then again, I understand that there's some education also that needs to be done, and a higher interest rate environment is of course helping now to alleviate some of these concerns. Then we also see that on the there's an element of activating. Well, first of all, there's an element of macro risk, perceived macro risk, local currency depreciation, which can get very tricky when you lend or borrow in hard currency. One approach, of course, would be to activate domestic capital, savings, and capital from institutional investors, which themselves have their own requirements and also deserve to be protected. So again, there's a nuance between finding the right balance of risk and rewards. And then I'm just going over my notes. I think I covered more of it. I think you mentioned that the central bank plays also an important role in terms of policy. So there's an important factor for regulation as well. So we're getting a bit nearing the end of our session. So I would like to ask one last question where you could maybe very briefly state your thoughts on how can we further mainstream green finance.
Thanks. I think, in my opinion, it's important for government and policymakers to really send a signal that this is important, and they can do that through green growth plans, or really articulating what their green growth agenda is. And I think from that, many things follow, because when you look at certain, for example, tax incentives, or creation of a tax framework that actually signals that green finance is it needs to be mobilized in an economy. I think those signals are shown in various policy direction. It could be in tax, for example, like the example that was given by Cynthia about the exemptions that exist in Kenya and other countries for investors who invest in green bonds who are exempt from paying withholding tax, and many others in sector-specific, tax treatment. For example, maybe an entity that assembles electric vehicles in a particular country. I think they should enjoy certain tax benefits for importing those products that they need, or the capital investments that they need, to signal to the market that this is how we want to go as an economy. And so for me, I think it starts from the top. And I also think that then everything else, flows to some extent, in the sense that then the regulatory direction, aligns as well. And I think together with that, if everything is set from the top, then even issues to do with creating the right enabling business environment for different subsectors of the financial sector, that is, whether it's in insurance space, banking, and the rest. I think everything then fits well. That's what I would say. I think that, in my view, is a quick win. Not to say that the private sector cannot already do what they need to do, but I think if we want to move faster, then I think a trickle-down effect would work quite well. Thank you.
I think for me, it might be basic, but I think just sharing information and knowledge transfer in terms of what is green finance, what does it mean at a granular level. I think a lot of people understand it at a very high level, but what does it mean for a manufacturing business? What does it mean for a bank? What does it mean for at that level? Because I think once you get that information there, you might find that perception issues in terms of high costs, that it doesn't have value to them, you start dealing with those issues. I think the other thing is, what we've noticed is sometimes that education is perhaps focused on the regulator at the regulatory level, the policy level. So you find that there's a gap with the implementers. Do they really know what that green finance is about and how they can actually incorporate it into their business? So I would say for me, the key takeaway is just more information sharing about what green finance is and what the benefits are. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think from where I sit in a DFI, I think the role of technical assistance really needs to be stressed, and be making it accessible to the commercial banks, so that climate finance is demystified right from the board level down to the strategy of the financial institutions and to the operational teams as well. I think having done 2 programs for climate, our initial program in 2010, SUNREF, and compared to the TFSC program that we now have running, the technical assistance has also evolved. We previously mainly focused on identifying projects, certification of projects, appraising projects, but really did not target the shift in mindset that is required with the commercial banks. And this is what we try to do with TFSC right across from strategy to operational teams. And so we sit with the banks towards product development, communication plans, marketing of climate offerings they can offer to their clients. And this should be a game changer in further enhancing climate finance.
Thank you. From our perspective, permit me to share our experience in terms of costs in order to mainstream green finance. Cost is very key. We operate in an environment where interest rates are about 25% to 30%. BOI is able to lend at single digits in this environment. And the main reason for that is because we've been very, very selective in terms of the kind of financing we source. And we've been able to also overcome or get around the challenge of the risk rating, country risk rating. If you go to the market now, the Nigerian debt is going for about 11, 12, 13% in the bond markets. We've focused on syndications, which are based on relationships, and therefore we've also used credit enhancement, guarantees, etc. Our most recent transaction, which was done which was done last year in August, was a 1 billion syndication, and that was done with the wraparound guarantee from the AFC. So the market was looking at the AFC and not Nigeria risk, and so we're able to do it at significantly lower cost. Secondly, the foreign exchange. Most of our borrowing is in foreign exchange. Our customers trade and all their receivables are in Naira. How are we able to do that? What we have been doing is that all the funding that we raised is swapped into Naira with the Central Bank of Nigeria. It's an FX swap as well as an interest rate swap. And so we don't have to worry about foreign exchange. We get the Naira, we do our lending and get paid, etc. The other thing is that cost of the solution itself, renewable energy products are not cheap. And so that's one of the other areas that need to be addressed. But with development and improvements, we're seeing that costs are coming down. Those are some of the challenges. And the last thing is also, it's really basically economics. We approach our customers and we say to them, why don't you let our experts do an energy audit and show you how you can save money by switching from fossil fuels to renewable energy solutions. We've seen that happen, and there have been cost savings of about 30%, sometimes up to 40, 50%. And it's a no-brainer for the customer to say, listen, I want to move into this. So those are some of the experiences that we wanted to share. Thank you.
For mainstreaming, I think the most important role is, of course, of the central banks. And I think in most of the countries, central banks have actually have rolled out the policies which actually encourages institutions to have green banking policy, and in certain countries they even assign targets as well. But this is so much that can be done by the central banks. Okay, the most of the mainstreaming would actually come through awareness. When the actual borrowers are made aware of the benefits to their businesses of getting into thinking about uh, being much more climate conscious. And on this I'll agree with Cynthia that knowledge sharing and awareness campaigns and capacity buildings, these are perhaps the three things would actually mainstream the climate finance in my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I then may summarize, I feel maybe we can start then with the policy side, where the regulator has both available a carrot and a stick. On the one hand, you need to impose certain frameworks and require organizations to follow certain standards. But at the same time, we heard that tax incentives, for example, could activate more funding towards greener investments. There's an element of perceived risk of the underlying projects, but also on the macro side. So certain tools are available on reducing that perceived risk. Again, there could be concessional funding, but also credit enhancement. And then, of course, I think something that came throughout, or recurring theme, is again capacity building and knowledge sharing, which is very important. And again, this is also something that we're trying to do here at GPIC in terms of knowledge sharing, sharing best practices and challenges, and connecting each other. So with that, I would like to invite the audience to give a round of applause for our distinguished panel. And I regret to inform you that we would need to cancel, due to time constraints, the Q&A session, but Our panelists are available, so please do reach out, come over and talk to us over coffee for any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.